So, common question students always ask is, how do you, get a job once you're out there in the world? So, if you don't mind, how did you get this job, getting involved with this, and any pro tips you have for jobs in general?
Well, in connection with this, Sarah, can we start again? We just start over. In connection with this, Clara, the brilliant and beautiful Clara Ziegler, had worked with me for a number of years, back before she was out on her own as a very successful stage designer. And the original team, Wingspace, who were designing the US exhibit for this PQ, were having a hard time getting it together. So, they, USITT via Marketa then approached Clara, and I was already on the, I don't remember what it's called now, but the board with Kevin and Carrie and so on. And so I was able to be a little pushy in terms of trying to support Clara and her design. And I had mentioned early on that back 20 years ago, when I was bizarrely representing America at the 1995 PQ, it was of course the year that England won, ironically. America had been safely inside the box with everything they did. And that tradition has pretty much continued over the years. There have been countries who've delivered riveting exhibits that made you want to rush over and say, what is that? And so I was pushing for something that didn't involve a lot of flat walls. And Clara came up with this. And of course it was a little scary to many people, including our beloved Carrie Robbins. So my job was mainly to try to ease the passage of the creation and the manufacture of this, which I was very happy to do, and I was also somewhat interruptive or interfering because of being at a stage in my life when I'm on a cane. So things, for example, like saying to Clara, we should really have a railing on the circular stair. And at the time that seemed like it was going to mess up everything, but she found this brilliant way to incorporate it. As to getting a job in general, you just have to throw yourself at the theatre in any capacity, help whoever, and get to know people. And of course, many of the instances that might arise are not going to have a sensible amount of money attached. But it's best to ignore that for as long as you can have parents help support you or whatever. Because the more useful you can make yourself in any capacity in the various theatrical disciplines, the more you'll be remembered and thought to be a good person to have around. And most of the people who came to me to work in my studios over the years found their way in by that route, or by a friend who had been very involved. And so a lot of it is just personal contact and being in touch. So any opportunity you get to throw yourself into a thriving theatrical event or community, just grab it, and things will start to happen. And if it's disappointing, it could well be that this isn't the field for you. If there's anything that can deter you, I would recommend letting it deter you and finding something that you really love. But if you insist on staying with your passion, the theatre, you will inevitably find that it's a glorious life, and that you make more families through the years as you go, and some of them as good as, possibly even better than, your real families. And so that's true. My wife, Jen, has always tried to make it a family within our studio and cooks lunch or supper or whatever. And people sleep everywhere, all over the place. So it's always been a kind of nest for new arrivals. And I don't know if it's coincidence, I sort of think not, but many of the people who worked with us over the years, who started off not getting on with each other, my wife Jen would say, "You watch, they'll be married within a couple of months." And that happened repeatedly, well, at least 3 or 4 times. All of them now have babies, so we have this endless family, trickles on and on. Most of them are now out in Los Angeles, working in television and movies.
So how do you start a job, after the job, is on your docket of things to do?
The design job?
Yes.
All right. Because the last 20 years or so I've been directing as well, so I have to clarify which we're talking about.
Design. So what's the first step when your people are like, this is a job and now you're on it?
Well, of course, you're presumably being given a script or some source material. And when I was starting out, I used to go through the script allowing a rush of imagery to attack me and making little doodles in the margins and so on. But there were times when the stylistic attack that I was developing instinctively would not necessarily jibe with what the director had in mind. So after a while, I took to trying to deal with the script as if it was a radio play and keep all imagery away until I'd had a chance to talk with the director. Or in some cases, for example, I've worked a lot with Mike Nichols, and he allows me, or even encourages me, to talk to the playwright if they happen to be living. And that has been an extraordinary experience. People like David Rave, who, when I asked him what was the nature, there were no stage directions in his script for Hurly-Burly. And I said, this is clearly about some sort of Hollywood group, but are they agents, casting directors, are they performers, what is their position? And he says, I don't know that I need to specify that. I said, well, where were you living at the time? Would that have been the kind of place that they would be living? He said, well, I was living in a kind of very strangely furnished guest house on a big Hollywood estate with all the tropical foliage. And he said the people who had been through there had sort of one by one furnished it, so nothing really jived. I remember particularly, he said there was a big fur lampshade on there, which looked as if Elvis Presley had been there. And he said, but I don't necessarily think I was setting it there in my mind, because when I write, I'm always seeing the performance taking place in the Elizabethan theatre, which is my favorite form of theatre. And I said, you're talking like the Globe? He said, yeah, I'm thinking that. He said, but then again, if I really try to investigate what's going on with the piece, I think it's like an only dimly related group of animals gathering in a caged clearing in the jungle and licking each other's wounds. And so all of those things that came from the original creator of the piece were profoundly valuable, and I tried to incorporate all of that, and using Malibu lights and amongst all of the tropical foliage and so on. And the actors, on the first day of rehearsal, I'd mentioned this to Mike Nichols, and he said to this you're all actors in a clearing in the jungle, and see if you can find a way to start your physical behavior once we get to that by choosing an animal and draping yourself in the manner that that animal would. So there were people like, Christopher Walken, who was immediately a jaguar, and Bill Hurt and Sigourney Weaver and Judy. And it was an amazing cast, and they immediately became these creatures. It was fascinating to watch. And then they had to be sort of gradually filtered back into the human version of themselves. But my own process now is before realizing any reality, so to speak, on stage, I try to picture lighting of some sort, a beam of light or whatever, UV lighting or something, that will be the first means of conveying what the space is about to be all about in terms of the story. And I try to identify, oh, it's hitting a shoe. It's a sneaker, right? Yes. And I gradually go up the character and try to discover if that's the story character, and if there's a staircase there, and if so, can I let my imagery drift further? And if I can find any music related to the period of the piece, or of course if it's a musical or an opera ballet, that music, I blast it out throughout this process. Sometimes if I have assistants around, to the fury of them, because I just keep it coming. And sometimes there are student rebellions, but they'll say, we got to hear Grease for a couple of hours. But it's perhaps one of the most helpful impeti for me is the music, because if you're designing an opera, say, and you're listening to Verdi, Puccini, whatever it is, there are so many negatives that you can gather. For example, this doesn't sound purple. Oh, I heard a flash of red, or whatever it is, And so those are incredibly helpful impeti, and I try to make sort of an amorphous, impressionistic gathering of all those impulses. And then quite often, for example, with the revival of Guys and Dolls, that Jerry Zaks directed for Nathan Lane, Faith Prince, I had seen the original Joe Melzi in a production in London. And of course, like all of us, he's a god to me, so I needed to find a way to escape the influence of his wonderfully sour palette. So playing that music and more recent music of Frank Lasse's, I eventually came up with this sort of fauve, amorphous painting, blob, 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 of all these colours that weren't Melzi's colours. And was able to end up with a painting that was the jumping off point for Runyon Land. And I tried to use everything that I'd got in that instinctual thing as that might be the subway entrance. Oh, I could probably turn that into the newsstand, and so on.
So, how do you get that vision out of your head? Like once you've got all those ideas and these colors and listening to music, how do you take that and put it into a rendering or a model or the actual, piece
It
itself?
totally depends on the nature of the piece. And I'm a sort of disciple of Boris Aronson's, who, as you probably know, said you have to start each new project as if you were a baby, as if you knew nothing, and let the piece itself demand how it needs to be physically expressed. So I try not to get into any habits of drawing or painting or modeling, and go with whichever of those techniques seems appropriate to what is beginning to speak to me. So if I'm using paper and paints, paint water, a jug of scotch. Sometimes the scotch gets in inspirationally, sometimes it gets in visually, because I quite often go into the wrong pot with my paintbrush. So I do give alcohol a little credit for some of what's going on. Probably shouldn't. Maybe we should erase that.
We can edit it out.
Okay.
So, what tools do you use to communicate these ideas, and what have you used? And not like verbal tools, but with your renderings and models and things. When do you show people rendering? When would you build them a model? How do you use those physical tools to communicate
Well, I
your design
try
to others?
to keep everybody, including the co-designers of the costumes and lighting, if I'm not doing the costumes myself, try to keep everybody involved, if the director will accept, even from the very first meeting with them. And that's true of the process too. So working, for example, with the dazzling Clara, I could indicate a wisp of something, and she could pick up a message from that and say, you mean, and make a little crude paper something. So it's not a habit. I tried desperately hard not to have techniques that I would repeat. So I can't really answer that question helpfully. My main effort is to try to find a new way to start with each project, and especially with costumes. There are teachers of costume design like Jane Greenwood at Yale that are so influential personally, not necessarily stylistically, and Ming, of course, that there are Minglets and Jeanlets all over the theatre, and you can tell exactly where their teaching came from. So I try very hard never to have my collection of costume designs look like any previous one I've ever done, and see if I can find one that belongs to John Guare, whoever it happens to be, Noel Coward, as a point of departure. And that's where I spend much of my time, is trying to find the physical presentational nature of what the costume should look like, hoping that not only for me, but that before all the magical co-creators or craftspeople en route to delivering the final shreds of your dream on stage, that they can somehow identify with the peculiar, new, fresh nature of the way this looks. And by and large, I've been incredibly lucky with that happening and feeling as if the collaborators are true creative collaborators, which is the best, because no matter how good your dream was, it'll only get better if you incorporate somebody else's dream along the way. And they'll have a better time because they'll think we're really participating and not just slaving. Hi, Charles.
How are you, Tony?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for sitting with us.
So you okay there?
Yeah, I'm great.
Do you want a cushion?
I'm totally great. Thank
Okay.
you.
You don't want something sparkly up your butt?
Oh no, I'm good actually.
Okay.
When I do that, I try to plan it out.
Okay.
So you have work showcased here in this. What did you choose to have here?
Well,
how did you choose to display that?
Again, because of the presentations at the past PQs, I was pushing to get as much variety as possible. I like to think of variety as my second name, as in the burlesque and musical, the things that start out intending to be pure entertainment, which tragically is not part of what the awards went to this year. with a couple of exceptions, they were so completely about politics and about a kind of performance art, which in the 60s we did a lot of. We used, what was it called? Happenings?
Yeah.
So almost all the awards went to happenings, except for, God help us, for China, who has such beautiful work, but in a very traditional exhibition setting and manner. So because Clara, who had started out when she was first applying as a possible designer of the exhibit space, had created a skull inside of which the work was represented. I love that. It's like the filming of Cabaret.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
exactly. That's good. The ghost of Bob will show up any minute now.
So I was hoping that it wouldn't seem like a gathering of minglets, but as if it was coming from as many sources as possible. And so that was not just the vortex or the maelstrom, as I like to think of it, but the individual productions shown and the individual pieces of work, that the more variety one could find amongst the presentations, the more lively I felt it would be, and the more representative of the peculiar nature of America.
Excellent. So, last question. Oh, no, there's a couple more. So, there's been a lot of collaboration involved with this, and a lot of different people communicating. What are your personal keys to collaborating with people and making that collaboration successful?
Well, if I'm interviewing somebody or somebody gets brought by a chum or something, my initial instinct is to try to imagine what it will be like living a life with this person. Not necessarily has anything to do with the nature of their skills. That's also, of course, incredibly important, but less important to me than having an amenable, if possible, adorable family member as part of our mix, because I know Jen and our daughters, now our granddaughters, are going to have to be accepting of whoever they are. And once in a while, I've not succeeded in getting a good mix like that. And either the two that are not mixing well get married, or it ends up being abrasive in a way that affects the whole studio. And so my biggest effort is to gather a little grouping that enjoys each other and that are respectful of each other. And as I say, I've been incredibly lucky in that way. And most of our families over the last 50 plus years are still families, and we see them wherever we go. And mostly in California, because television and movies there, most of them have ended up there with their own families, their own babies, their own children, their own 30-year-old kids.
Is there anything else you would like to add about how you do what you do, or advice for people?
Well, I was asked, sorry for name dropping, but many years ago I was asked by Paul Newman on behalf of the Actors Studio to teach a class for the Actors Studio at the new school. Then it's since moved on to Pace. And I said, what are you asking? You want to have Actors Studio students taught design? He said, yeah, they should be. I said, I don't want to do that. Every time I start out, because Boris Aronson said so, I start out as a baby. I don't want to say I know anything. I want to say I know nothing. And he said, well, what would you teach? So I said, I kind of like to talk about creative collaboration, which I think of as les liaisons dangereuses. He said, great, go for it. And, a couple of years went by, and I thought, of course they're never going to do it. He was just winging it. And suddenly I got a call from Paul saying, your classes start next week. Can you give us some sense? So that we can put something in the booklet. And so I've been doing that. and they're mostly writers and directors and actors, although I bring in designer chums. And that has been an extraordinarily valuable experience, because I've been trying to lean on them to not feel limited by the techniques that they've been taught or have learned in various ways. So, for example, one of the students, who was a writer, presented her version of a production of a play. This was an imagined, ideal production of the first play that my wife wrote, which we soon presented. But her presentation was musical and tapestry, and absolutely beautiful, and it got to the core of the piece. Oh, which reminds me that I should say, when we actually did that play, and I was the designer, I had learned something which I didn't really entirely believe from François Truffaut, the great French movie director, with whom I designed a film. But when I first met him, in my appalling French, because he spoke no English, I went up and blithered away at him at how fabulous and perfect I thought the movie of Jules and Jim was. And he looked as if I was punching him across the street because of my pronunciation. You know how the French are. And so we had a tricky collaboration from that point of view, from the language. But when I had gone on enough about Jules and Jim, he, through his script girl, who was his translator, said, you know, it's not anywhere near as sophisticated as you make it seem. Everything that is unhappy is rectilinear or set in a corner, and everything that is stable is in a big rectangle, and everything that is agonizing is set in a corner, and everything that is comforting or happy, joyful, celebratory is set within a circle or an arrangement of curves. And I said, oh, sure, you know, of course it is. You know. And then I saw the film again later. I said, well, shot by shot, you could say that's true, that's what he did. So I asked Jen if she would mind if we tried to incorporate these principles into the design for her first play. And astonishing. Now, luckily, the play was about a troubled girl and her less troubled and rather sleepy mum, and her trying to, the daughter trying to break her way out of the controlling home where she was trying to piece herself back together, putting square pegs in round holes and so on. So I made a Sonex sort of cyclorama in which I cut out a triangle, a circle, and a rectangle, and then made the same shaped pieces as the furniture for the whole piece. Got moved around. And so, of course, we had to have a triangle as a table with its own secret hideable base, so you couldn't tell how it was standing up. And miraculously, it should have seemed merely pretentious and aggressive, but in some way it embraced the play and everything that we were conscious of that needed to live within the play managed to live within that very calculated environment. So my hat's off to Truffaut, and I pass it along to anybody who might feel intrigued to try it.
Excellent.
Okay.
I have a question. If are you?
That's it.
You're done. You've got the 7 questions, which we're asking everyone, which is great. But you said something at dinner the other night about the PQ not including as many renderings as you thought, and
yes.
I didn't pick up on it until later when it kind of occurred to me that maybe you could talk a little bit about, or maybe we talked about that. Did we?
We touched on it, but not
I'm just
really.
curious about the comparison of tools of communication and your process between
Right.
model building, storyboarding, and rendering. I
Well,
think those are.
I mean, tragically, one of the side results of the miracle of digital creation is that it's virtually impossible to maintain the personality of your flatwork creation through digital means. Carrie Robbins, who I adore, has for years and years now, because she was one of the very first people to incorporate digital maneuvering, manipulating in her work, shows me what she's just done digitally. And she's one of the best creators of man-made, gal-made costume designs, the sketch on paper, ever in history. I mean, absolutely staggeringly beautiful personal work, and Carrie leaps out of it at you. And the digitalized version could be anybody there. It's this flat thing, you know, and it's no way you can take advantage of the accidents in the way that you do in real life. No, because if you program an accident, it's no longer an accident. So there's a real snag there, which is expressed rather beautifully by, oh my God, Frank Gehry, who, of course, through his associates, uses computers and digital work throughout everything he does because of all the swoops and swerves and so on.
Sure.
And eventually his associates sat him down in front of a computer and tried to give him a few lessons. And he said, after 20 minutes, I ran screaming from the room because it didn't matter what I did, it dried everything out. And it's an interesting thing. And of course, somehow that'll get solved eventually, but who knows how many million years that might take. And right now, when I was expressing that to you about renderings and flat work and so on, somebody pointed out that there were some beautiful costume renderings in the Egyptian exhibit. So we went to look at those, and indeed there are, but they are either digitally presented or they're printed probably from a digital source. So the same thing has happened. You can't sense the spirit of the creator, but it's wonderful work. It looks like absolutely top-of-the-line student work, you know, but you don't smell a creative gift coming through at you from it. You smell research, you smell technique, and you smell all of the craft abilities, but you don't get a sense of the person, the personality, the creative force behind it, the thing that is trying to stay alive. And for me, that's the hardest thing in the theatre, how to keep your original dreams and hopes alive all the way through the process to its arrival on stage. And, you know, Murphy's Law is unavoidable. Everything is trying to destroy it on its route to final presentation. So the more you can keep the original, let's say, for want of a better word, the original spark alive by the participants who are involved getting in touch with that or inspired by that or whatever, and feeling that they're now part of a creative force as opposed to a digital mechanical force or whatever, the better chance you have of a living thing emerging on stage. I don't know how many, I mean, of course you've seen zillions of shows that use most of the new digital techniques. And for me, although many of them are in various ways dazzling, nothing compares to a production in which you sense the force of the creative team. And many shows, there was a musical about Ray Charles, which was all changing LED imagery throughout. It had no point of connection with Ray Charles' work at all. And so it destroyed it. It was just not a thing where you could feel Ray Charles, even though you were listening to him, because this massively important, aggressively attention-getting thing was in the way. And that's happened for many things. the later Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, The Lady in White, was it? Lady in Black?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Think of something.
brilliantly sophisticated projection by the same designer who did The Coast of Utopia in England, all projected. But most of the time you were just dazzled by the fact that the staircase was coming down towards this person who was going. And you said, what just happened? Who said that? Who said what? It was just not possible to get in touch with the source material. It's, it's very easy to distract with cleverness. And that's the most dazzling thing about digital work. Isn't that clever? How'd they do that?
I understand better what you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Well, I'm going to sound like an incredible old fuddy-duddy, but of course,
We ask your opinion.
Like
That's why we're
everybody,
talking about it. Everybody has,
and I use, of course, digital tools and advantages all the time, but I have to have somebody such as Clara working with me in order to do that, and I'm dazzled by what they can do, and I pick up a little tiny bit from time to time, and I think I'm really getting on top of this, but I'm sad to say that I don't ever feel, oh boy, this is useful creatively. It's useful in every other imaginable way, but you can't make it invent something from your heart, because it doesn't know how to get there, nor should it.
Wow, that's
Sorry.
no, that may be a very, very true statement. Especially those of us that have almost sort of grown up with it.
Yes,
And
yes.
we don't know. I mean, when Sarah and I both said at dinner, oh, the Egyptian ones you have to see, that's our context.
Yes.
And I've grown up watching,
Yeah.
even looking at Oliver Smith's renderings
Yes.
and Lloyd Burlingame's renderings and some of that NYU route and
Yeah.
and I do see the difference
Yeah.
in the work, but I also
now that
have
you
to
mention
admit
Yes.
I have to admit that it seems old.
Yes.
It's like my students say about black and white movies.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, Kirby, those don't exist. Like,
Yes.
as if they just don't exist. Like they just, well, there is light, there is,
Yes,
there's
yeah.
location, there is story, there's so
Yeah.
much to get, but they just don't. It's almost as if we just don't see them
Yes,
in the
yeah.
same way. In the same way. So it's
No,
interesting.
it's a fascinating predicament.
And it's true in every industry too. I mean,
Yes.
it's all business and everything. Just the
Yeah.
information age just
Yeah.
began.
But in many
a different
cases,
thing.
for us, there are textural elements in the physical designs, especially costume designs, swatchery and so on.
It makes a lot of sense because while I was in the Egyptian exhibit and I was walking around, the thing that struck me the most was the set design rendering that had these three-dimensional elements coming out of it because it was physical and it was there and it wasn't digital.
Yes,
And
yeah.
there was so much more of that feeling, and it's like I didn't even notice it really at the time.
Right.
But now that you mention it, and I think about what struck me the most about that, it was the one that was very obviously hand done.
Yes. Yeah. And Jen, incidentally, was drawn to that one and to a related digital print of it. And she said, why is this so flat? There doesn't seem to be any depth in it at all. Yeah. But on costume sketches, there are little bits of fluff and fur and such different textural treatments. And you can't, it's essentially trompe-l'oeil by the time it's gone through the digital process. So it can teach you how to do trompe-l'oeil, but it can't teach you how to create.
Yeah, and then you look at the presentation of this. I mean, it's such a sculptural piece, and
Yes.
so tactile, but
Yes.
yet we're still looking at iPads.
Yes,
On
yes.
some
yeah.
level,
Well,
we are
there's
flattening
something wonderful
everything.
about the
Something-
energy of that contradiction,
Right,
of that
right.
little battle. And of course, Clara started with a model, a beautiful, extraordinary model that everybody went into stark panic about.
You know you've done something right.
Yes,
when
exactly,
When people
yes,
are
yeah.
panicking. Yeah, so that's
And
my
I try to think,
personal-
well, of course, you can't even begin to think about the awards here, because
no.
it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And if it turns out to be as good as it will, there's not a prayer you're going to get. Nothing original, fresh, arresting gets an award ever. It's always the solid, safe stuff that does. So it's curious because politically you couldn't say that the 2015 happenings
Whatever those are.
right, yeah, are traditionally creative, but they are in some way original. They're, there's a fresh something's
Something's changed.
But for me, it's
into
almost
something
nothing to do with theatre design. Almost nothing to do with theatre. It's to do with something else, and let's honour that. And some of it is thrilling. But if you're a theatre critic, as I am, there's no way not to be thrilled by what you see throughout all the exhibits here, but incredibly disappointed with the jurors' response to it. But we've since learned there was only one designer amongst the jurors, and the rest were essentially variations on theorists. So it makes
I
sense.
didn't hear that. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah,
Right. And that's what they're looking for.
yeah. And if you are a theorist and you're trying to understand what that image of stage lighting looks like, of course you're going to say, I don't know how to look at this.
I don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yet, interesting discussion. I mean, certainly
Absolutely.
Yes.
gets us out of our seats. Right?
Yes.
Nothing
And
wrong with that.
hopefully it'll create a little,
Yeah. Little drama.
drama and maybe some rethinking, and let's hope.
Would make sense, at a conference where we're displaying theater works and trying to display different countries' theater, to have a jury made up of critics who were theater
I'm
designers.
not sure if they were critics, I think it was
Or,
teachers, but
Teachers.
not necessarily teachers of design.
right. Anyone, just
Yeah.
people who were involved in the thing that they're supposed to be jurying.
Yeah. Well, the thing that they sent out, did you get that? Originally about the themes of politics
No.
and weather and
That
so on.
was-
Well, that was extraordinarily erudite and ridiculous. There was no way any of us could figure out what it was saying. Except it was in some way, I could say maybe inspiring or intriguing enough in the confusion of it to make you wander about in your brain and try to find a place to attach to.
Oh, and it was,
So,
it was something
yes,
that inspired
yes,
this
exactly.
and from Clara and you and so many different other
Absolutely.
works.
But a little of that came about through those people going back to the committee and saying,
Climbing all over it.
what did you mean?
Yeah.
So
So great. Well, thank you so
this
much.
was it was extraordinary that Clara created this in the middle of the season of tornadoes and typhoons and storms across America. And so in addition to sort of expressing all that and expressing a lot of what's going on in my brain, as you can probably tell, it's also, for me, expressive of the incredible shambles that America is and all the different routes that come into it with the best of all possible intentions. And I'm here because of the Declaration of Independence. Fuck, what a fabulous idea. And I guess we're still struggling towards it.
And we are living it. I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways, the
Well, we're
same
living through the
interest-
problems of
Right,
trying
but that
to
is what it's
recognize
how it's written is
Yes,
to figure
yeah.
out those things with the
There it
fingers.
is.
And there it is. Yeah, there's something there. Absolutely.